Welcome to Inchworm Quilting. My name is Diane, and before I retired, I used to be a school teacher, and I loved every minute of it. But now I'm a quilter, and I love to quilt because I love to share the quilts I have made with those people I love. And soon you will be able to do the same. Let me introduce you to someone I met in the garden. Come on. Little bit shy. It's okay. Come on. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Little bit shy. Just a little bit. Come on up. There you go. Okay. Hi, this is Inchworm. Inchworm, in our class, we are going to learn how to cut a quilt, how to assemble the quilt, and how to finish it off. Yes, how to finish the quilt. We're going to learn about tools. Now, there are many tools that we use that are kind of dangerous, so you need to have an adult, mom or dad or grandma with you while you're learning the tools. Also, there are vocabularies that we use in the quilting that we do not use in the garden. And so you're going to learn words. So listen to those words, okay? Yeah, it's going to be fun. Come and join us. We're going to have a great time. Say bye-bye for now. And let's get started on our quilting. Say bye-bye. Say bye-bye. He's a little bit shy. That's all right. That's all right. There you go. Bye-bye. Start with 3 fat quarters. Fabrics come in a variety of pre-cut bundles, shapes, and sizes. A fat quarter is the perfect shape we need for the sample quilt we are making. Iron each fat quarter. You will notice that there is a right side and a wrong side to the fabric. Most manufacturers print on one side of the fabric. This is the right side, or the front side. The back of the fabric may have some color from the dye bleeding through. You will notice there is a selvage and 3 raw sides. A selvage is a tightly woven edge of the fabric used in the manufacturing so that the fabric doesn't unravel. We will cut our selvage off at the end of our project. Now it's time to square up the fabric. Straightening your fabric to the top of your mat, you will notice that I will be demonstrating how to square the fabric using for a right-handed person. You're going to be using a rotary cutter. Now, a rotary cutter is very sharp and can cut you with a nasty, nasty cut. So always keep your fingers away from the blade. It's important to keep your ruler still as you cut. Notice that when I cut, I kind of walk my hand up the ruler. But another trick is to use a heavy book. This keeps the ruler still as you use the ruler as your guide. If you are left-handed, you square up your fabric on the other side. Squaring up takes off the rough edge so that you have a nice straight edge to cut your pattern pieces. Notice as I do this that my fingers and thumbs are far away from the rotary cutter. After I've squared up my fabric, I need to switch and turn my nicely cut straight edge to the other side. This is the side that you will cut from. Now, take time to learn your ruler. Notice that your ruler starts at 0 and the top, and that it goes to 6 and 6.5. And then on the side, it just goes from 1, 2, 3 to 24. This is the cutting edge that we use when we make our quilt pieces. Today we're going to cut 5-inch strips. Put the 5-inch line on the straight edge. Use the heavy book to keep the ruler in place. Yeah, make sure that's on the 5-inch line. And notice how I kind of walk my hand up as I cut, but the heavy book is a real good thing to use. There's my piece. Now I have to cut 3 of those. Here they are, my 3 pieces. Now I'm going to demonstrate how a left-handed person would cut their fabric. I've already squared up my fabric and I've moved it to the other side so that I can cut my pieces on using my straight edge. I use a heavy book to keep my ruler in place. Using my right hand on the ruler, I use my left hand to use with my rotary. Now it's time for us to cut our other fabrics. This one, make sure you squared up your fabric, and I've squared mine up before you cut. And there we go. Keep your fingers away from that rotary, like I said. It will cut you pretty bad. Now it's time for me to cut my border. I've squared up my fabric and I've moved my fabric to the other side. You will hear quilters talk about preferences. A quilter's preference is what they prefer to do. A person's preference does not affect the quality of your quilt. So I'm going to cut my borders for my quilt, and I prefer not to cut them to size, but I will cut them to size as I quilt, and you'll see that later in the project. We need to cut 5 strips at 3.5 inches. And measure, when you place that 3.5 inch on the straight edge, always measure twice before you cut. That means always be sure on your measurement before you cut. There we go, that's our border. Here I've assembled my little quilt. It's the layout. The main part of the quilt is surrounded by the border pieces. And now I'm going to lay out my quilt. I've put down my main piece, and on top of it, I'm going to put down My other piece, my purple, I go yellow, purple, purple, yellow, purple, yellow. Then I pin it. I'm lining up the side that is the selvage side, and then I'm pinning it. You will notice that at the end it doesn't quite match, but I want my selvage side to match. I pin the remaining ones and come to my sewing machine. Sewing machines have face plate, and this is what the face plate looks like without the needle bar. It has feed dogs and guides and a needle throat. And it's the feed dogs that pushes the fabric through the machine. The guides are in 1/8 measurements. It starts with 1/4 inch, then adds an eighth to that, and you get 3/8, and adds an eighth to that, and you get 4/8, or the equivalent of 1/2 inch. Then you add an eighth to that, and you get 5/8, add an eighth, and you get 6/8 to the equivalent fraction of 3/4. So this is using your equivalent fractions that you've learned in school. All of the sewing we do in this project is 1/2 inch. Because it's hard to see the faceplate, we mark it with a piece of tape. So find your 1/2 measurement and mark it with a piece of tape. I use a starter to fabric to lessen the chance of my fabric getting jammed into the needle throat. This is also a preference. Using starter fabric like this, you butt the quilt piece to it and use the 1/2 inch guide, and then you take the pins out as you sew, and you'll see how that works. Now I get my piece, I put it right next to it, right under it a little bit. Take out your pins as you sew, because you do not sew over your pins, because they will break the needle, they will bend the needle, or they will nick the needle. And so when you come to a pin, you stop, you pull the pin out, then continue sewing. Go at a slow and steady pace. You will feel the fabric being pushed through with your feed dogs. At the end of each piece, I'm going to chain onto the next piece. Chaining is when you sew right on to the next piece. It saves time and it saves thread. Most every quilter chains as they sew. After you've got those pieces together, you need to cut your threads. Cut your threads as you go is a good thing to remember. Press your fabric. I'm going to press all my seams to the top. Now you kind of lay it out and you continue to assemble your quilt. Make sure you always pin right sides together. Remember, we're matching at the selvage, and the other end is going to be a little raggedy, but we're going to match everything at the selvage. So notice here how I pull my thread to the back before I start, and this keeps your threads from tangling into your project. And I'm going to use my starter fabric. You can use that over and over again. I sew to the edge, and I butt the next piece right up to it. And I continue to make my 1/2 inch seam. Your hands are just to guide the fabric. You really don't need to push the fabric because that's the job of the feed dogs that are underneath. So just guide your fabric and go at a slow pace. I've got mine all together except I had one last piece of purple to attach to the bottom of my quilt. So I'm going to pin it and sew it now. So there we have our top. We are going to press all the seams in one direction. And there you go. Just one direction. Press them one direction. And notice that the selvage side is pretty well straight, but the other side is not. And that's the side that you're going to first square up. And so you'll take it to your cutting mat and square it up. And that you'll probably take off about a 1/2 inch. So it'll be nice and even for you. Okay, I've already squared up my one side, and now I'm going to use that side as my measuring side, and I'm using my tape measure, and I am going to measure 20 inches in width and mark it with the pencil in 3 or 4 places. And then I line up my ruler and I square up that side. So this is the selvage side. Now we have gotten rid of our selvage. All the sides look so nice and neat. It's time to prepare the border. There are 5 pieces in the border. To prepare the border, I need to trim off the selvage. And it takes about a 1/2 inch, maybe a little more, to trim off the selvage. I'll have 5 selvages that I trim off. Now take the quilt top, and I'm going to add my border to the top of the quilt, right sides together. Notice that the border is longer than the quilt top. It's not a perfect measurement, and I'm going to show you a trick later on how to make that even. So pin the top border and the bottom border. You know, you can trim it right now. Every quilter does have a preference, Preference is how the quilter prefers to do things, and my preference is to cut it later. There's no right or wrong way as long as it does not affect the end product or the end quilt. So take it to the sewing machine and sew your 1/2 inch seam. Do both the top and the bottom. So now it's time for me to cut off the excess border. And you'll see I use my quilt top as the guide. And you just trim it away like that. Do it to both the top and the bottom. Okay. Now it's time to sew the remaining border pieces together. We're going to sew them into one very long strip. So you pin it right sides together. Going to make a very long strip, and now it's time to add the third strip to that border. So now we square up the border strip to the quilt sides and we pin it. Notice that as you put the border onto the side that you will have a tail. So just like we did before, you use the quilt top as a guide and you cut off the strip or the tail And then you do the same to the other and take it to your machine and sew the sides with a 1/2 inch seam. And here we have our finished quilt top. They did a pretty good job, huh? Yeah. Join us next time where we actually finish it off so it's ready to use. Say goodbye, Inchworm. Goodbye. Till then.